My stepmom insisted I call off my engagement until my stepsister got married, accusing me of deliberately wrecking her life. Here's the backstory: my stepsister is getting married, and somehow she decided I'd be footing the bill for her wedding venue. Not a small contribution, not a little help here and there if needed. She expected me to cover the entire expense. Why? Because a few years ago I helped out with wedding costs for another sister, so she assumed it was only fair that I do the same for her. But she didn't just want any venue. She had her sights set on the most expensive, scenic spot in town, the kind of place that would drain anyone's bank account. She didn't even approach it casually. She sent a text out of the blue that essentially said, "Hey, I found the perfect venue, and since you covered our other sister's wedding, I thought you'd cover this one too." It was like she naturally expected me to hand over a large sum of cash. At first, I genuinely thought it was a joke, like she was trying to see if I'd laugh or agree, but she was completely serious. I read the text, totally shocked, thinking, is this for real? It wasn't even a polite request, it was more like a demand. To clarify, I'm not sitting on a pile of cash. I helped my other sister because she was in a tough spot, and the whole family pitched in to make her day special, but I can't afford to drop thousands of dollars on a venue without it impacting my finances. Plus, the way my stepsister asked felt so entitled, like she assumed I owed her. So I texted back, politely saying, "I'm sorry, but I can't cover this." I tried to be considerate, not wanting to start a fight or make it seem like I didn't care, but I needed her to understand that I couldn't be her personal bank. Naturally, that went about as well as you'd expect. Almost immediately, she started bombarding me with messages, each one angrier than the last. She threw out lines like, "So much for family," and accused me of only caring about our other sister's happiness. She even insinuated I was probably jealous that she was getting married. What really set me off, though, was when she involved my stepmom. Not long after, my stepmom called, acting like I was some kind of villain for not supporting my sister. She went on about how disappointed she was, saying it was my responsibility to help because I was the one with a steady job. Meanwhile, I could hear my sister in the background, probably prompting her with things to say. They both talked as if I was sitting on a lottery jackpot, refusing to share. I explained that I helped our other sister in a difficult situation, but that didn't mean I'd agreed to fund every family wedding from now on. But they weren't listening. They'd already decided I was the bad guy. At one point, my stepmom even said, "If you don't support your sister now, don't expect her to support you when you need it." I couldn't help but think, when have they ever supported me? I've been on my own financially since I first started working. After that, I decided to let it go and move on, hoping they'd calm down and realize how absurd they were being. But later that night, I got a notification from a family group chat with our cousins and siblings. Thinking it was the usual chatter, I opened it only to see a long message from my sister. She went on a rant about how selfish I was, twisting the story to make it sound like I'd promised to help her just as I had with our other sister. She made it sound like I was heartless and didn't care about her big day at all. Naturally, this got the other family members stirred up. They began asking why I wasn't helping and wanting to know what was going on. I felt like I was on trial, forced to defend myself just for saying no. Some cousins even messaged me privately, asking things like, "What's going on?" or "Why is she so upset?" So I found myself explaining that I wasn't some uncaring jerk, I simply couldn't afford her luxury venue. Surprisingly, a few of my cousins actually sided with me, especially those who had planned their own weddings. They understood budgeting and were just as shocked by her entitlement. One cousin even suggested if she can't afford it, maybe she should pick a cheaper place. But of course, my sister ignored that advice and kept acting like I was ruining her entire wedding. The situation escalated the next day when my stepmom called again. She'd clearly been listening to my sister's sob story and gave me a long lecture on family duty and honoring commitments. I cut her off, clarifying that there was no commitment. I had never promised to pay for her venue. I could tell she didn't believe me, like she'd already made up her mind that I was in the wrong and wouldn't listen to reason. Then she dropped the line that really took the cake. "We were hoping you'd step up and be the example here." An example of what? Going broke so my sister could have her dream wedding? I'm sorry, but if being the example means letting myself be guilt-tripped into paying for things I can't afford, count me out. I told her flatly, I'm not paying for it. End of story, and hung up. I thought that would finally end things, but they kept involving more family members, painting me as the villain out to sabotage my sister's wedding. It was wild watching them rally people against me, like they were trying to start a campaign. They even tried to bring my dad into it, but thankfully he stayed out of it, saying, "It's her money, she can do what she wants with it." At least someone in the family had some common sense. After that, I blocked both my stepsister and stepmom. I was done with being guilt-tripped and attacked over something as unreasonable as this. They acted as if my refusal to pay for an overpriced venue meant I was single-handedly canceling the wedding. All I wanted was to enjoy my life in peace, without being dragged into my sister's fantasies. If her wedding day mattered so much to her, maybe she could focus on staying within her budget instead of treating me like her personal bank. A couple of months after the drama over her wedding venue, my boyfriend proposed and we got engaged. It was one of the happiest moments of my life. We were already living together, but this felt like the next step, and I couldn't wait to share the news. I thought, hey, it's just good news, what's the harm? Turns out, I was very wrong. I told my family, posted a few pictures and thought nothing of it. But within a day, my phone was blowing up. It was my sister calling, and I naively assumed she was reaching out to congratulate me. The second I picked up, I realized something was wrong. She was already screaming at me as if I'd committed some unforgivable offense. She was yelling about how I was stealing her thunder and I had to hold the phone away from my ear. She went on about how hard things had been for her and accused me of rubbing my engagement in her face. I barely got a chance to speak as she ranted, calling me selfish and insisting I was ruining her life by getting engaged before her wedding. She actually said, "You're only doing this now because my wedding hasn't happened yet. Since when do I have to put my life on hold because of her wedding drama?" I calmly told her, "I'm sorry you feel this way, but my engagement has nothing to do with you." I hoped she'd take a moment to see how irrational she was being, but she continued, claiming I had some twisted need to overshadow her. My fiancé, watching all this, gave me a look that said, "Is this really happening?" Then she started dragging my fiancé into it, accusing him of proposing only because I pressured him so I could get engaged first. The accusation was so absurd that I couldn't even respond. She seriously thought I'd manipulated my engagement just to spite her. I felt my blood pressure rising, but I refused to let her ruin this for me, so I told her I was done with the conversation and hung up. A few hours later, I received an email from my stepmom, and just the subject line, "Unbelievable," made me brace myself. The email was a full-blown rant, saying I should have waited until after my sister's wedding to announce my engagement. She accused me of stealing her moment like I'd intentionally plotted to overshadow my sister. She went on about how my sister was struggling, and it was thoughtless of me to add to her stress with my selfish decision. Then she hit me with, "It's not too late to do the right thing and postpone your engagement announcement." I stared at my screen, stunned. Was she actually suggesting I announce my engagement as if it never happened? I couldn't believe the entitlement. I decided not to respond because I knew it would just lead to an endless argument, and I wasn't willing to be dragged into that. I figured they'd vent and get over it. But I was wrong. The next day, I found out my sister had posted a dramatic rant on Facebook, talking about how she's always had to deal with selfish people trying to overshadow her and steal her joy. She didn't mention my name, but anyone who knew us could easily tell it was about me. Some of her friends commented things like, "You deserve better," and "Some people just don't know how to be happy for others." My stepmom was, of course, there, leaving hearts and supportive comments, fueling the fire. Friends started messaging me, asking if I'd seen what she posted. I felt embarrassed. It was so over the top and petty. One cousin, who'd been supportive from the start, even commented on her post, saying, "Isn't it time to let people live their lives?" That made me laugh. But it didn't stop her. My sister replied, "You wouldn't understand because you're not a bride," as if her situation made her the authority on how everyone else should behave. Then she texted me again, saying I was being disrespectful by ignoring her feelings, and that the right thing to do would be to take a break from social media and let her have the spotlight back. She even suggested I tell people I'd rushed the engagement and that we were taking it slow, so she could have some space. I nearly dropped my phone reading that. I responded, "I'm not doing any of that. This is my life, and I'm allowed to be happy without it being about you." I hoped that would shut things down, but she kept going, saying if I really cared about family, I'd support her instead of making it all about myself. At that point, I'd had enough. I told her, "I don't know what you want from me, but I'm not putting my life on hold because you're unhappy. If you want to act this way, fine, but I'm done engaging," and I blocked her. I thought this would bring peace, but then my stepmom started texting, accusing me of being cold-hearted and abandoning my family at a crucial time. She told me I was turning my back on my sister when she needed me most. It was pure guilt-tripping, but I wasn't falling for it. I left her on read and blocked her too. For a while, things were quiet. A few cousins who saw my sister's Facebook rant reached out, asking if I was okay. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, so I just told them, "It's all just drama, don't worry about it." But deep down, I was frustrated. This was supposed to be one of the happiest times in my life, and instead I was dealing with family members trying to ruin it simply because they couldn't handle my happiness. I shouldn't have been surprised, but somehow I still was. I'd always known my sister could be dramatic, but this was a whole new level. All I wanted was to enjoy my engagement, celebrate with people who genuinely cared, and start planning my future. Instead, I was dragged into a family soap opera I never asked to be part of. In the end, I decided to focus on those who were happy for me and forget about the ones who weren't. I wouldn't let my sister or my stepmom steal this joy from me, no matter how hard they tried. After blocking both of them, I thought that would be the end of it. I really thought, okay, they'll cool off, maybe realize how ridiculous they're being. But instead, blocking them only seemed to throw more fuel on the fire. Suddenly, I started receiving a flurry of calls and texts from relatives, all asking the same question, what's going on. At first, I was baffled since I hadn't shared anything about the argument with my family and assumed they would respect my privacy. I was wrong. My sister, with our stepmom's backing, decided to broadcast her grievances to everyone, not just a few people, but through a full-blown smear campaign against me. It began with my aunt, who's close to my stepmom, so I wasn't shocked she was the first to reach out. But rather than asking my side, she immediately accused me, texting, "I can't believe you'd treat your sister this way. She needs your support, not this cold-hearted behavior. Don't you care about family?" She added, "I didn't expect this from you," as if I were some villain for not putting my life on hold for my sister's wedding drama. I tried to clarify, but she'd already sided with them, convinced I was in the wrong thanks to whatever narrative my sister and stepmom concocted. After that, more relatives started reaching out, cousins, uncles, and even family friends, all asking why I was being so mean to my sister and why I couldn't wait until after her wedding to share my engagement news. They'd all been fed a twisted version where I was the villain, stealing my sister's spotlight during her supposed hardship. I started to grasp just how distorted her story had become. My sister and stepmom even told everyone I'd promised to delay my engagement announcement until after her wedding, accusing me of breaking a family pact just to ruin her happiness. It was so absurd that it almost seemed funny, except of course it wasn't. One of my cousins, who's typically level-headed, reached out wanting to hear my side. She asked, "So, what's this about you agreeing to delay your engagement for your sister?" I took a deep breath and explained that there was no such promise or pact. I hadn't agreed to put my life on hold for her, and it was ridiculous that my sister was spreading such a lie. My cousin listened and seemed to understand, but still said, "I get it, but you know how your sister is. Maybe if you'd just waited a few months, this wouldn't have blown up." That's when it hit me. My sister had managed to convince everyone that it was my responsibility to keep her happy, no matter how unreasonable she was being. It felt like I was under siege, with people lined up to assume the worst based on her twisted version of events. I began to dread checking my phone, knowing there would be another accusatory text or missed call. Even extended family members I hardly spoke to chimed in with their judgments. It felt as though I were unwillingly starring in a family drama that I hadn't asked for. Then my grandmother, who's usually a neutral presence, called, asking if I could come by to talk things over. I could tell by her tone that she was genuinely concerned, so I went over, hoping this would finally clear the air. When I arrived, she looked at me with a disappointed expression, asking, "Why didn't you just wait? Your sister is very hurt by this. She says you promised to hold off until after her wedding." I felt defeated but calmly explained, "Grandma, I never promised anything." I didn't agree to wait, and I had no idea my engagement would cause all this chaos. She nodded, listening, but I could tell she was still conflicted. She said, "You know how emotional your sister can be. Maybe she really thought you would hold off for her, although I understood her perspective." It frustrated me that everyone seemed to excuse my sister's behavior while expecting me to just endure it. By then, this entire ordeal had become exhausting. Each time I thought it couldn't get worse, my sister found another way to paint me as the villain. She even told people I had purposely distanced myself from her because I couldn't stand her happiness, framing me as the petty sister jealous of her joy. The lengths she was willing to go to tarnish my reputation were shocking, and what hurt most was that people believed her, or, at the very least, weren't willing to give me the benefit of the doubt. Even those who had known me my entire life seemed ready to accept her version where I was the antagonist. At one point, my fiancé suggested that we share our side of the story on social media to set the record straight, but I felt that responding publicly would just make things worse, potentially adding fuel to the fire, especially since I knew my sister would twist it into more drama. Instead, I chose to focus on my own life. I explained the truth to those who were genuinely interested, and for everyone else, I figured they would believe what they wanted. Gradually, things started to settle down. I'd occasionally get a passive-aggressive comment or a judgmental glance from a few family members, but it seemed that people were beginning to see how unreasonable the whole situation was. My sister eventually stopped her campaign, or maybe she just ran out of people to complain to. Either way, I was done letting her interfere with my life. This whole experience was a wake-up call, teaching me that no matter how fair you try to be, some people will create drama and try to drag you into it. If that's how my sister wanted to live, then I was perfectly content letting her go her own way. I had an engagement to enjoy, a life to plan, and real friends and family who knew the truth and genuinely cared about my happiness. In the end, I decided that if anyone still believed her side of the story, that was their issue, not mine. I was done defending myself to those unwilling to see the bigger picture. Although my sister painted herself as the victim, I knew the truth, and so did the people who mattered to me. I chose to let it go and move on with my life, leaving her drama firmly in the past. Once the smear campaign began to fade, I thought things would finally return to normal. My sister had been quiet for a while, likely tired from spreading her story to anyone who'd listen. I started to relax and enjoy my engagement without all the noise. But, as I should have anticipated, that peace didn't last long. One evening, my fiancé and I were casually discussing our wedding ideas, just brainstorming venues and dates, nothing set in stone or shared publicly. That's when my phone suddenly began buzzing non-stop. When my phone started buzzing non-stop, I figured it was an emergency involving a friend or family member, so I quickly picked it up. Almost immediately, I saw my sister's name on the screen, and my fiancé and I exchanged a look, already sensing this wouldn't be a friendly chat. But I still hoped maybe she'd calm down and would be civil wishful thinking on my part. The second I answered, she started yelling, not just talking loudly, but full-on screaming. She was furious, ranting about how she'd heard we were planning our wedding and accusing me of setting a date before she'd had her own wedding. I hadn't even shared any details with her yet, but that didn't stop her from accusing me of rubbing it in her face and purposely ruining her life. She shouted phrases like, "You're trying to take everything from me, and this was supposed to be my year." I was stunned. She acted as though my wedding plans were a direct attack on her. Every time I tried to respond or calm her down, she'd interrupt with more accusations, saying things like, "You just can't stand to see me happy, and you always make everything about you." I was left speechless, listening in disbelief. Then she escalated things further, accusing my fiancé of being part of some conspiracy, claiming he only proposed because I'd pressured him into it, and that we were both out to ruin her happiness. She even said, "I bet you only planned this wedding to mess with me. You don't even love him, you just want to be the center of attention." That was enough for me. I handed the phone to my fiancé, who calmly told her, "Our relationship has nothing to do with you, we're happy, and that's all there is to it," but she wouldn't let it go. She continued ranting, her voice just a loud, angry noise by this point. Finally, he ended the conversation with, "We're not discussing this anymore," and hung up. I hoped that was the end, but of course it wasn't. An hour later, my phone was flooded with voicemails from her. Each one was worse than the last. The first was her ranting about how selfish I was. The second was an entire monologue about how I was ruining her life and that I'd regret it, and by the third message she was sobbing, accusing me of breaking her heart and destroying our family. It was heartbreaking to hear, but also unbelievable how far she was taking this. I briefly thought about calling her to try reasoning with her, but I knew it would only make things worse. She was too invested in her victim narrative. Then she went a step further and called our dad, hoping he'd talk sense into me. Soon, my dad called, sounding worn out rather than upset. He said, "Your sister is very upset. She thinks you're doing this to hurt her." I could tell he was tired of the situation too. I explained everything, assuring him that my engagement had nothing to do with her. He sighed, "I know that, but she doesn't see it that way," and admitted he didn't have the energy to argue with her about it anymore. I understood and told him I didn't expect him to pick sides, but I wasn't going to apologize for moving on with my life. I thought that would be the end of it, but my sister didn't back down. She started spreading more lies, telling everyone I'd stolen her wedding date even though she hadn't set one. She claimed I'd tried to book her dream venue before she could, which was absurd because she hadn't even picked a location yet. She was making up stories to get people on her side, and the worst part was that some family members believed her. Cousins reached out, asking if I'd really booked her venue. And I had to explain the situation repeatedly. It was like she was playing a game, seeing how far she could push this. Finally, I'd had enough. I started blocking people her anyone who was buying into her lies, and anyone pushing me for explanations. I told my close friends and supportive family what was really happening so I didn't have to keep justifying myself. I wanted my life back without her drama. I realized her meltdown wasn't about me or my engagement. It was her inability to handle her own insecurities and losing control of her moment instead of dealing with that. She chose to paint me as the villain, but I wasn't playing along anymore. She could cry, scream, and throw as many tantrums as she wanted, but I wouldn't keep listening. I had my own life to focus on, and if she couldn't handle that, it was her issue, not mine. After everything, I decided enough was enough. Blocking her, our stepmom, and a few family members stuck in her twisted narrative was the best choice I made. I knew it might stir up more drama, but at that point, I didn't care. I was exhausted from defending myself, tired of constantly explaining my decisions. I just wanted peace. Blocking them didn't solve everything immediately, though. She wasn't done. Since she couldn't contact me directly, she resorted to posting vague, bitter things online, sharing passive-aggressive quotes every other day, stuff like, "Some people are so self-centered they'll ruin your life without a second thought, and blood doesn't make family, loyalty does." It was classic attention-seeking meant to provoke questions. Friends began sending me screenshots of her posts, and even family members reached out asking, "Are you guys okay?" or "I'm worried about your sister, she seems really upset." I didn't reply to any of them. As I saw it, anyone who truly wanted to know the real story already knew, and if they preferred her one-sided pity show over asking me directly, then I didn't need them in my life. Eventually, people started catching on. They realized her posts were the same drama recycled repeatedly. Family members stopped bringing it up, and friends who saw through the mess chose to let it go as well. After a few months of peace, life was finally moving forward. My fiancé and I were absorbed in wedding planning and work, and for the first time in ages I felt genuinely excited about the future we were building together. Free from the constant drama, I could focus on what brought me joy without feeling weighed down. Then, out of the blue, my dad reached out. He'd mostly stayed out of the mess, but now he wanted to meet and suggested that the family sit down to try and patch things up. Although I understood his role as the family peacemaker, I told him I wasn't interested in reopening the chaos with my sister and stepmom. Surprisingly, he accepted my decision, saying he respected it and would always be there if I changed my mind. Knowing I had his support without being pressured back into the drama meant a lot. Around that time, it seemed like my sister's attempts to paint me as the villain were losing steam. Her bitter posts and messages became less frequent, and she even started skipping family gatherings. I'd be lying if I said I felt sorry for her. This situation was her own doing, and any distance from her chaos felt like a relief. With her absent, family events became enjoyable again, with people focusing on each other rather than taking sides. It felt like a huge burden had been lifted. Meanwhile, my sister appeared to keep mostly to herself, talking only to our stepmom and posting the occasional passive-aggressive quote online, though it no longer carried the same effect. People had stopped paying attention, as there's only so much negativity anyone is willing to put up with before they tune it out. Reflecting on everything, I realized how much this ordeal had taught me about setting boundaries. Growing up, I had always felt like I needed to be the one keeping everyone happy, but I finally understood that some people will never be satisfied, no matter what I do. Accepting that and letting go of the need to please everyone felt freeing. Now, I'm focusing on what truly matters: my supportive partner, wedding plans, and the friends and family who actually care about my well-being. I'm done worrying about people who thrive on drama and bring me down. If they can't handle seeing me happy, that's on them, not me. Although it's sad things turned out this way, I feel like I'm in a better place. My life is finally free of unnecessary conflict, and I'm surrounded by people who lift me up instead of dragging me down. No more rumors, guilt trips, or constant back and forth, just peace. I hadn't realized how heavy my sister's negativity was until I cut her out. Now I'm focusing on building a life with my fiancé, creating genuine, happy memories with those who truly support me. If my sister ever decides she wants to make amends, I'm open to listening, but I'm not holding my breath. Nor will I pause my life for her again. This experience made me see that I deserve to be happy, and I won't let anyone take that from me. Update: just as I thought the drama had finally quieted down, my stepmom reached out with one last guilt-tripping message. It started innocently enough, asking about me and the wedding plans, but soon it was the same pushy narrative I needed to reach out to my sister. She went on about how family is everything and how my sister was struggling without me, as though it was my responsibility to fix everything. I could almost hear her using the same tone she'd always used to pressure me into doing things her way. But this time I wasn't falling for it. I knew her version of making things right was just about getting me back in line to make my sister feel better. She even suggested I invite my sister to the wedding, claiming it would be a perfect opportunity to mend things. I wasn't having it, I replied, making it clear that I was happy with my choices and focused on people who genuinely supported me. I told her I didn't appreciate the manipulation or guilt-tripping, and if my sister wanted to fix things, she could reach out herself without a middleman. True to form, my stepmom replied with more drama and guilt, accusing me of throwing away my family and turning my back on those who had always been there for me. It was clear she hadn't learned anything. Frustrated, I calmly but firmly told her I was done with these games. I'd spent too long bending over backward to keep everyone happy, and my wedding day wasn't going to be some group therapy session to mend old wounds. A few hours later, my dad called. He'd heard about my conversation with my stepmom and wanted to check in. After I explained everything, he understood and said he'd talk to her about letting it go. I appreciated his support, even though he was caught in the middle. In the end, my stepmom's attempt didn't change anything for me. If anything, it reinforced how important my boundaries were. My sister and stepmom could either learn to respect that or deal with it on their own. I was done letting their issues affect my happiness. This was my life, my joy, and I wasn't sacrificing that for anyone anymore.